During the ferocious revolt of Queen Boudica of the Iceni and her allies in the year 60, why did the 2nd Legion based in Exeter refuse the order to join the governor, Suetonius Paulinus, and the other Roman legions in the climactic battle?
In the year 60, King Prasutagus of the powerful Iceni kingdom died. This huge British Celtic tribe were based in East Anglia in eastern England, but despite being a warlike tribe, they were a client kingdom under Roman rule. The king had left half his wealth to Emperor Nero in Rome and the other half to his teenage daughters. Roman writer Tacitus, the son-in-law of the general and future governor, Agricola, said,
Prasutagus, the late king of the Icenians, in the course of a long reign, had amassed considerable wealth. By his will, he left the whole to his 2 daughters, and the emperor in equal shares, conceiving, by that stroke of policy, that he should provide, at once, for the tranquility of his kingdom, and his family.
The king had been in direct agreement with Rome through treaty relations, not the kingdom itself. Once a leader died, a new treaty needed to be made with the new leader. But the Romans decided that direct rule was now what they wanted. Instead of making a new treaty with the daughters of the king, or even his queen, Rome decided to aggressively take over the former client kingdom. Unimpressed with his half share of the estate, Emperor Nero dissolved the tribe's client status. The loans forced upon the Iceni chiefs by Claudius, Nero and his advisor Seneca were suddenly recalled with extortionate interest. Most tribesmen were alien to the Roman way of trading and money lending. Coins were previously not the preferred means of trade for the British Celts, despite them having minted plenty.
Consequently, Roman soldiers were ordered to steal loot from Iceni homes, enslave nobles and brutally abduct women and girls.
And so, Decianus Catus declared that any resistance would be treated as an act of rebellion. Naturally, this deeply angered the Iceni, but worse was to come.
Prasutagus' dominions were ravaged by the centurions. The slave pillaged his house, and his effects were seized as legal plunder. His wife, Boudica, was disgraced with cruel stripe, her daughters were ravaged, and the most illustrious of the Icenians were, by force, deprived of the positions which had been transmitted to them by their ancestors. The whole country was considered as a legacy to the plunderers. The relations of the deceased king were reduced to slavery.
When Boudica took the matter to Catus, he ordered that she was publicly stripped and flogged, and her teenage daughters were raped by Roman soldiers. Why was Boudica herself not raped? There is evidence which suggests that Boudica was more than just a queen of the Iceni. Boudica was either a female druid, or the priestess to Andraste. The ancient sources show that female druids did exist. Also, possibly, Augustus's law forbade sex with a widow, although this would probably not have been applied to enemies and slaves. Desecration. By defiling the princesses and whipping the queen as a slave, Rome was humiliating and insulting Boudica and the Iceni royalty and, if Boudica was a druidess, defiling the gods. Whipping was designed to humiliate, and common for slaves, and metal pieces and leather knots were added to the whip to increase pain. Evidence suggests it was normal for a woman to rule in Celtic society, and if Prasutagus' decision may have had to do with the prospect of his daughters' future marriages. Ruining the marriage prospects of the girls could have been one aim. Civil war. Could Boudica and her daughter's savage treatment by the Romans have been a response to a possible internal argument by rival noble factions within the Iceni after Prasutagus died? But the revolt didn't happen immediately after this shocking chain of events, despite popular myth. Had it been so spontaneous and knee-jerk, its very chaos and unplanned campaign would have doomed the revolt to quick failure. Druids exercised unchallenged religious, legal and military power over all of the Celtic tribes, moving from one to another, and had their own special type of liberty. In Roman eyes, Druids were a major threat, with way too much power over the tribes. During spring 60, Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus led a campaign with the 14th Legion, part of the 20th against North Welsh tribes, but especially the sacred groves on Anglesey to wipe out the Druids, believing that the south and east were secure behind him. The Romans had been expecting a rebellion, and had been on their guard especially after only 13 years since the last Iceni revolt. Boudica, most likely with Druid help, will have planned a campaign with the Trinovantes and maybe the Catavalorni, at the expense of their harvests, maybe aiming to seize Roman grain supplies instead. Possibly the Druids also coaxed factions of the Corieltorvi and the Debuni of the Midlands, the Dumnoni and the Durotrigis in the southwest and the warlike Silures in South Wales. A revolt of this size would have demanded thorough planning, and it was said to be extremely rare for tribes to unite in fighting a common enemy. However, if Boudica was a high priestess and linked to the Druids, it would have been possible for officially endorsed messages to be sent through to the leaders of each tribe, as well as those suppressed Britons residing inside Colchester. The Iceni chiefs and Druidic planners would have needed to choose sound military targets on a solid campaign trail, secretly gathering weapons and amassing warriors at prearranged meeting points, as well as gaining the complicity of neighboring tribes, the Regni under Cogadubnus, and the Cantiaci, both to the south of the River Thames, wouldn't be worth approaching as they had benefited greatly by the arrival of Rome, had become wealthy and might even betray the revolt. So, off went Paulinus with the 20th and 14th Legions northwest. In spring-summer 60 Boudica revolted. The first target was the hated Camulodunum, modern Colchester, the former Trinovantian capital and, at that time, a Roman colonia. The Roman veterans who had been settled there had mistreated the locals, and a temple to the former Emperor Claudius had been erected there at local expense, making the city a focus for resentment. It was also virtually unprotected, and the citizens panicked when hearing of the revolt outbreak. Catus only sent 200 soldiers. Boudica's army fell savagely on the open city and destroyed it, torturing the hapless citizens and besieging the last defenders in Claudius's temple for 2 days before burning to death the vulnerable cowering inside. Archaeologists have shown that the city was methodically demolished. The future governor Quintus Cerealis, then commanding the Legion IX Hispana, attempted to relieve the city from their Lincoln fortress, but as he neared, he was ambushed and the entire infantry 2,000 legionaries were wiped out on the way. Only some of the cavalry escaped, we are told.
The victorious enemy ambushed Petilius Cerealis, commander of the 9th Legion, as he was coming to the rescue, and destroyed his infantry. Cerealis escaped with some cavalry into the camp and was saved by its fortifications.
After this defeat, Catus Decianus fled to Gaul. Tacitus mentions that Boudica's armies do not bother attacking the Roman forts but bypass them, heading next towards Londinium, a defenseless trading center with Roman officials present. When the startling news of the rebellion reached Suetonius, he broke off his successful massacre of the Druids and marched, Tacitus states, not rode, back down Watling Street through hostile territory to Londinium. Suetonius considered giving battle there, but considering his lack of numbers, and chastened by Cerealis's 9th Legion defeat, decided to sacrifice the city to save the province. Taking some of the weak and desperate citizens with him, and sent messengers out to his legions. The 14th and 20th were marching to meet him in the Midlands already, and the 2nd at Exeter had been sent messengers to meet him at some strategic meeting point further north. The 2nd Legion had been camped at Exeter since 48 after a brutally successful campaign along the south of Britain against various hill forts, under the then General Vespasian, the future emperor, father-in-law of Cerealis. In 60 it was under the 3rd command of Poenius Postumus, a veteran centurion promoted after a long and honorable military career. He was left in charge as his legate and the senior tribune, Agricola, Tacitus's own father-in-law, were on campaign with Paulinus himself. but he never struck camp and marched his army to aid his governor, Paulinus, in dire need of veteran troops. Messengers were sent again and again calling for Legion II in the southwest to come and give support in the coming battle. Although, curiously, the UNRV Roman website states in their intro page that the 2nd Legion did join with Paulinus in the final battle against Boudica. Boudica's army burnt the 20-year-old settlement of Londinium to the ground. Tacitus is brief about the atrocities committed by vengeful Britons, lists burning, executions, head lopping, etc., but the Greco-Roman historian, Dio Cassius, goes into more gruesome detail, sadistic mutilations and sexual torture of noble Roman women. Did Boudica think that Roman Britannia was falling and decide, in her bloodlust, to chase Paulinus and finish him? Did she think it was worth one last cast of the dice, even though her tribesmen and women hadn't reaped their harvests and might at the very least face starvation? Or had she lost control of her hordes, maybe with other tribal chieftains vying for the glory? Hard marches brought the 14th and part of the 20th Legions to the region of Venonus, High Cross, where the Fossway and Watling Street cross each other in the Midlands, just as their commander arrives back from the south. The 2nd Legion had not shown up. Instead, the messenger arrives to report their absence from the rendezvous. Only the 10,000 men present are at his disposal to face Boudica's alleged 100,000 furious warriors. Roman Emperor Nero briefly even considered withdrawing Roman forces from the island, as reports are initially woeful. Paulinus had chosen to face the tribes on a huge open field, forested on 3 sides and sloping away to the front, ideal to channel the enemy in and negate the tribal chariots or any ambush. He lined up his men on high ground and awaited the onslaught. Battle finally engaged when the Britons found and faced the distant formation of rigidly disciplined Romans up the slope. After battle cries and incantations, the traditionally ferocious Celtic charge of the Britons and their chariots ensued. But the Roman discipline and armor began to tell. After brutal and bitter fighting, ultimately Boudica and her horde were pushed back, routed and finally massacred at the Battle of Watling Street by the heavily outnumbered but highly disciplined and veteran forces of Governor Suetonius. Of the reputed 100,000 plus Celts, tribesmen, with women and children who came to watch the victory, Tacitus claims over 80,000 were butchered, many as they fled, but were hemmed in by their own carts and families behind them as they were driven back. Roman armies were drilled to move forwards in formation, killing every living thing in sight until halted: warriors, females, children, babies and animals. Tacitus simply stated that Boudica poisoned herself, presumably also her daughters with her, to avoid a miserable life in Roman slavery and humiliation. Britannia had been saved by Paulinus's incredible coolness and great generalship, but, amongst all of the Romans who could have been held liable, Nero, Catus, Cerealis, or even Paulinus, one man was held to blame, Postumus of the 2nd Legion at Exeter. Tacitus wrote,
Poenius Postumus II, camp prefect of the 2nd Legion, when he knew of the success of the men of the 14th and 20th, feeling that he had cheated his legion out of glory, and had contrary to all military usage disregarded the general's orders, threw himself on his sword.
But why had Postumus and the 2nd Legion not marched into battle when ordered? Postumus was a veteran centurion, promoted during a long and honorable military career, now camp prefect, but he wasn't actually the commander of the 2nd Legion. His 2 superiors were almost certainly with Paulinus himself, which commanders often did. Extremely loyal, brave and trusted. For this reason, it seems highly unlikely that he panicked, mutinied or was frozen with indecision when Paulinus called him to battle. Possible theories. Had he even received the messenger's orders from Paulinus? Maybe the riders had been unable to even reach the second, and lied to the governor, a feared and brutal man. Postumus, without any further news from Paulinus, may have calculated that the revolting warriors were now too strong en masse and that Paulinus was dead. The enemy had already defeated the 9th Legion, and if Paulinus had been similarly crushed, then Postumus might have been vindicated in his decision to refuse combat. He may have even received some hint of Nero's thoughts on withdrawing all Roman legions from Britain altogether. Postumus would have had to firstly slash his way through the lands of the warlike Durotriges before facing an enormous march along the entire length of the Fosse Way. This would have been suicidal, as the route was no doubt lined with numerous defiles flanked by woods on either side, perfect terrain for a British ambush, and furthermore, right in the heart of enemy territory. It's possible that it might have been so severe that Postumus was already engaged in fierce fighting. The Roman populations of Camulodunum and Londinium had been slaughtered. Maybe he feared ambush mid-march or severe revolt in his absence, and became bottled up like the 9th in their fortress. In the mid-2000s, archaeologists found that the 2nd Legion at Exeter were involved in heavy fighting or siege warfare in the Somerset area at this time. So Postumus would have struck camp and needed all his men to suppress any revolt, and not dilute his strength by sending a vexillation north at this crucial time. Excavations at Cadbury Castle, a huge hill fort 500 feet above sea level, dominates Somerset, and dramatic evidence has been discovered. Layers of skeletons of brutally slain defenders from this time, which were previously believed to have been Britons who opposed Vespasian's many campaigns here during 43 onwards. Their mutilated bodies, found with weapons and armor fragments, Roman and British, were then left on the ground for wild animals to scavenge, many showing evidence of telltale iron Roman siege artillery bolt heads. English historian Michael Wood, In Search of the Dark Ages, 1979, mentions a widespread rebellion.
Other risings were taking place from Lincolnshire down to the southwest. At Margidunum, just north of Nottingham, Romans were being slaughtered. That rebels were in arms as far away as Somerset, where archaeologists have only recently associated with Boudica's revolt a terrible massacre of British women and children inside one of the gates of the Iron Age hill fort at South Cadbury.
Many scholars believe that this site was brutally attacked by Romans between 45 to 61, stating that the latter date was probable. Or was it attacked during Paulinus's punitive attacks in 61? Possibly Postumus was not noble, wealthy and very well socially connected like Cerealis, the son-in-law of Emperor Vespasian, whose 9th Legion were all but wiped out, but who later still went on to become governor of Britain. So could Postumus be a hapless but heroic scapegoat to save the embarrassed reputations and rapacious greed and cruelty of powerful men? And thus history has been twisted to suit them. We've not heard that one before, have we?